Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn, as GMs and as players, from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 61, Denizens of the Moonbrush. The game picks up with the cast immediately standing outside of the cave where Vex and Keyleth encountered the Spirit Bear. And I actually think this is a mistake, or at the very least, this isn't something we have to do in our own games, and I'll demonstrate why by recapping the next few minutes of the game. The trees part, and Vex and Keyleth are back with the rest of the group, and Grog wants to see what else is in the cave. Most of the rest of the party thinks that's a bad idea. After all, Keyleth touched one of the piles of bones outside the cave and summoned the wrath of Orlon the Spirit Bear, so maybe it's not a great idea to go into his home and start messing with his stuff. But Scanlan says he'll come along, and to be honest, I think this might just be because Sam is a good scene partner. He sees that Travis wants to go check something out and nobody else wants to go, so rather than just have Grog go in alone, or have Grog not go in and Travis feel like he didn't get to contribute to the game the way he wanted to, Sam decides that Scanlan will go into the cave with him despite the protests of their fellow players. They go into the cave and they find some candles and a beast-like skull made out of crystal. It's too big for them to move, and I like that Sam and Travis take the hint. Obviously, Grog is strong as hell, and Scanlan can summon a giant purple hand, but both of these players are really good at reading Matt's cues. I honestly think almost everyone else at the table might have just powered through and tried to at least figure out if there was something else they could get. Instead, Grog and Scanlan decide to just pretend they saw something scary and run out of the cave, so at least they'll have a good story. They even cut Grog's eyebrow to show that he got totally messed up by something scary. But Grog's a bad liar, so the group figures out pretty quickly that nothing actually happened. Now, what I just described plays out over the course of 20 minutes. And let's be clear, this is not bad. Matt's players are having fun, so honestly, what's the harm? But I would at least like to point out that this game didn't actually have to start right where the last one left off. Matt could have jumped forward in time so they were already moving through the forest, considering there wasn't really anything left to do here. Now, in fairness to Matt, it's actually really rare for his players to not want to investigate something when they resume a new episode in the aftermath of seeing something cool. Usually, Vex and Scanlan will want to loot something, Keyleth will want to harvest stuff, maybe the others will also get curious to see what they can find. So the fact that this game opens with most of the party not interested in exploring the cave is actually pretty unusual, and probably not something Matt could have expected. But this also speaks to a pattern that is often true of Matt's games, but doesn't need to be true of our own. Whenever he ends a session, the default assumption is that the next game will open immediately afterwards. And sometimes that works great, especially if he ended on a nice cliffhanger. Other times, he might have ended the session on a fantastic note, but picking up in the same place just feels a little bit underwhelming. In this case, there's nothing really to do at the cave, so you could just jump ahead. Open the session with the characters trekking through the forest and have them start rolling survival checks, just get them right into the game. There's also a middle ground option. Let's say you're not sure if your players want to explore that cave or not. You can just text them between the games, hey, I know we had to rush the end of the last session. Did anyone plan to explore the bear's cave, or should we start the next game with you walking through the forest toward the bog? Then, if someone says, yeah, I want to check out the cave, you can make the cave into a little bit more of a meal. I think one of the reasons I personally wish Matt had just started the game with the cave in the rearview mirror is because the cave kind of felt like an afterthought at the beginning of the session. I don't necessarily doubt that he had an idea for what was in the cave, and maybe it was even in his notes. But we know what it sounds like when Matt starts a session with the intention of drawing the player's attention towards something. It might sound something like this. Keyleth, as you and Vex get to your feet and dust yourself off, you look at the cave that the bear emerged from, and the mouth of the cave just towers over you, this cavernous maw that almost seems to rumble with ancient magic and spiritual energy. What do you guys want to do? And that way the cave would feel more significant rather than just being this little pit stop that slows down in the momentum of the session. Speaking of the momentum of the session, Matt does something I really like. As the party starts to move on, they can't remember if they took a long rest. They think they took a long rest before they encountered the Spirit Bear. After all, that is something they would almost certainly do. They would have rested before entering the spooky forest. And Matt says, it's fine, I can't remember either, but if you didn't take a long rest, it's only because we ran out of time in the session, and it wouldn't have made a difference for the bear encounter anyway. So let's say you slept. Matt's players have a very funny relationship with in-game time, which we'll probably discuss another day, and they're having a hard time keeping track of it. And that's not helped by the fact that it's been 2 weeks since their live show game, and that session was just a blur. So Matt just hand-waves it and says, whatever, take a long rest, I'm fine with retconning that. I think that's a good way to resolve the situation. And in fact, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but if you pick up your session with a bit of a time jump, it's super easy to just retcon a long rest when you already accept the idea that there's been a time jump in between sessions. Anyway, as the players move through the forest, they hear music from somewhere nearby, and they also hear some people laughing. A few of the party members are really curious. Vex really wants to know what's going on. Vax doesn't think that's a great idea, but also, counterpoint, he does really want to see that theater that Garmelie keeps complaining about. This might be that. And everyone else is trepidatious, but curious. So Vex and Vax go to check it out, and they bring along Garmelie, and Scanlan tags along when he realizes the laughter could mean someone over there is being charmed, and he has a counter-charm ability. In fact, Sam only realized he had counter-charm in their first Feywild session, because it didn't really matter in any games before that. So now that he actually is trying to incorporate it into the game, He's trying to figure out how it works.
Can I just kind of be doing counter charm? Can I hum a little tune? Is that how it works? I don't know how it works.
Well, it's time for you to learn how one of your abilities works here, Sam.
Okay.
Alright, so, for Counter Charm, as an action, you start a performance that lasts until the end of your next turn. During that time, you and any friendly
6
creature...
seconds?
Yeah. Hold on. But you can the performance ends early if you're capacity. You can keep doing it every round if you want to. It doesn't say there's a limit to it.
All right.
Yeah. So,
I'll just keep sort of humming.
I made a whole video about the various reasons the cast of Critical Role does not know their abilities that well, and why I don't think it matters that much, because quite frankly, if something bothers you as an audience member but doesn't bother Matt or the other players, it's not a big deal. But this moment ties into one of my points from that video, because it does seem like Matt wants Sam to learn how this feature works, so it seems like he is bothered by this. He wants his players to know their abilities better. So here's the lesson I talked about in that video. If you're the GM and you wish your players knew their features better, then don't read them their features. Instead, put the responsibility on them to find their features in the book and read them to you. Matt always grabs the book because it gives him a chance to read the entire passage, rather than the truncated version his players sometimes read him, if they read him anything at all. But I honestly believe that the fact that Matt never makes his players look anything up for themselves is one of the biggest reasons they don't feel the need to make an effort to learn this stuff. Why would they, when they have a safety net? Anyway, Scanlan realizes he can't start humming before they get close because they're trying to sneak, so he'll start singing if things get hinky. Now, ironically, Scanlan is joining this errand to give Vax and Vex advantage against being charmed, but he doesn't realize that half-elves already have advantage against charm effects. Even the gnomes have advantage on saves against magic. So this would really only be useful if Grog or Percy were coming along. Oops. Oh well. As they're discussing this plan and how it's probably a bad idea, Laura literally just says, I just want to see what they're laughing at. It's seriously just FOMO. It's a fear of missing out. And watching this episode, I realized that this is actually what drives the entire Feywild arc. Obviously, they came to the Feywild for one reason, to get the bow. And while they were here, they wanted to make sure Singorn was okay, that was not high on their list of priorities. But from the very first moment they arrived, members of the party were already running off on their own, checking out whatever seemed to be off the path. And as we'll see from this moment, as well as some things that play out later in this episode and the next episode, there are plenty of other moments where the party will see something weird, and they'll know they shouldn't check it out, but they still go toward it anyway. Sometimes running full force into things they really should have known better than to try and mess with. And I have a theory as to why that's the case. It's because the Feywild is so different and so weird compared to Exandria. They investigate plenty of mysteries in their home plane, but a lot of them are intrinsically tied to the lore of Exandria. When they find some weird structure underground or whatever, like the ziggurat under Whitestone, they might later learn that it's a former temple of Ioun, as Osisa revealed when they asked her about it. There's a bunch of stuff in their world that connects to the Calamity. I made a whole video about that. Multiple villains have plans that were set to go off around Winter's Crest. These mysteries are all linked, and because of that, they're all fairly similar in tone. They're all gothic fantasy or maybe epic fantasy stories. But here in the Feywild, things feel much more like what you might find in a storybook. I honestly think Matt's version of the Feywild is probably a pretty tame compared to what others might do in their own games, but it works perfectly for what he needs, a world that runs on storybook logic. And so whenever these characters see something that seems like it's straight out of a fairy tale, they just can't help themselves. They have to go and look. There is another factor as well, which is just that staying on the path is the most boring option. It's the right choice, of course, but if they never wander, then presumably nothing happens. Matt is actually going to figure out a way to solve that problem later in the session. We'll see that in the next scene. But we saw this happen when the players reached Vasselheim. They were told to just fall in line and follow the priests through the streets, and they were restless. They wanted to make choices, but there were no choices to make. Here, they're just following a linear path, but they're being offered these choices that they know they shouldn't take. But if they don't take the bait, then the first hour of this game is over in 5 minutes if they don't go into the cave and they don't go check out this music. So I think that's why they keep giving into temptation and pursuing these things that they were so clearly warned not to do. Anyway, our inquisitive heroes approach the music and laughter, and they see some people dancing around a fire. Because at this point, Vex gets a bad feeling, but Vax sneaks ahead to go check it out. Sam asks if he can sing his counter charm through the earring, and then he remembers that he and Matt have had this conversation. The earrings don't work that way. That's a really good house rule. It keeps Scanlan's abilities from being too broken by their magic earrings. Vax gets close and sees an elf warrior from Singorn dancing with a wolfman around a fire pit. Nearby, a violin, flute, and drum float in the air playing music. Vax has to make a save against the music, and even though he rolls a 17, he breaks stealth and happily joins the dance. Vex and Scanlan fly in on the broom to try to pull Vax out, but Scanlan fails to save against the charm and joins the dance. Vex snatches up Vax with the Raven Slumber necklace, and now for the first time Matt describes the inside of the necklace. The inside contains a dark stone room, 4 walls, a single stone throne in the center, facing out toward a glass window the size of the other walls, showing the perspective from the necklace. We've seen Matt slowly begin to develop the idea that the creatures inside the necklace are aware of time passing, and now there's actually a physical space inside, and I like that we've seen that concept getting fleshed out in real time. Meanwhile, Vex can now see that the other dancers are emaciated from dancing for who knows how long, and there are piles of broken bones around them. The cast members grin, and they're excited and horrified by this. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's the perfect Fey bullshit. This is the kind of thing they don't get to see in their usual games, but it absolutely fits the promise of the premise of wandering through the Feywild. Vex tries to pull Scanlan free, but the other dancers drag him back to the dance, so she flies back to the group and explains the situation. Keyleth conjures cotton to put in their ears, and Percy gets close to try to shoot the weapons. As he approaches, the magic penetrates through the cotton, but Matt allows Talus an intelligence check to make sure Percy can stop himself when he notices the music getting louder than it should. I like that ruling a lot, because he knows Taliesin is probably going to say, well, hold on, if it seems like the earplugs are not working, I wouldn't keep going. So Matt immediately offers that option by leaving it up to the dice. Are you aware of your surroundings enough and how sound should be muffled to figure out that the cotton isn't working? That's a great question. Let's leave it to the dice to decide. Taliesin rolls a natural 20, so he's good. He shoots the violin, and Vex shoots the drums. There are 2 bursts of psychic energy, and Scanlan has to roll 2 saving throws. He gets 2 natural 20s, so presumably he only takes half damage, which still winds up being 24. The elf and the wolfman didn't have nearly as many hit points, so they die instantly. And despite having been shot, the instruments immediately reform and resume their song. However, Grog can't be charmed if he's raging, so he volunteers to go in and rescue Scanlan. Keyleth conjures a stone fist and punches him, and he goes into a rage, runs in, and grabs Scanlan. Once his turn ends, and he's in the middle of the campsite, Percy shoots at him to keep the rage going. Look at these players working together and being aware of how each other's abilities work. It's awesome. Grog is able to drag Scanlan away from the campsite, and as they leave the music's radius, the instruments stop playing and sink down to the ground, waiting for their next victim. And Garmelie says, well, that was the happy campsite. Not sure why you rushed in to see it when I warned you about it. I don't even know if Matt knows why his players approached it. But to be fair, all I have is the theory that I shared with you, and I didn't really have that figured out until I sat down to write this script. Honestly, for the past 8 years, I've just been wondering why Vox Machina kept getting drawn toward each novelty of the Feywild, like a fly toward a candle. But now, as we've discussed, I have my theory, and I feel pretty good about it. However, I actually do think Matt realized the issue. His players are going to keep wandering off and exploring things they shouldn't, despite their own better judgment. It's happened twice in this session already. But if they don't go explore these things and they just follow Garmelie's lead, then nothing's going to happen. And what if they learn their lesson? What if they realize, oh, we should stop doing anything. Let's just walk and nothing's going to happen. But luckily for Matt, at this exact moment, as they leave the campsite, Grog asks about the lycanthropes Garmelie warned them about. They apparently lurk in the trees, so he asks if there are any around. So Vex looks up, and Matt has his opening. He doesn't need to wait for his players to blunder into his next set piece. He can drop it directly in front of them right now. Literally. It's also possible Matt had already determined they were being followed and watched, but either way, he knows that now is the point to put the lycanthropes in play. Vex sees a set of eyes in the trees, and then the creature hurries out of sight, and Vox Machina hears a howl. And at that moment, 6 lycanthropes drop down from the trees. See, I said it was literal. Most of them are werewolves, though one of them is a were-tiger, and then emerging from the trees is a were-bear. Scanlan explains that they're looking for the Shade Murk Bog. They announce that they're trying to destroy this cancerous tree in the Feywild that's causing all these problems, which it's not really, but, you know, it's the best line they've got. And to prove their bona fides, they boast that they've already dealt with the happy campsite, so, you know, they're pretty impressive. The Lycans call out for Ukurat, the Lycan leader, who, again, they were warned not to interact with. But then Ukurat arrives, and he's a huge werewolf. And he says that they'll let Vox Machina leave if they do a favor for the Fendir, which is the name of this tribe of werewolves. If Vox Machina doesn't do them this favor, then the Fendir will just hunt and eat Vox Machina. Ukurat explains that they're being menaced by the Pixies, a faction known as the Wishers. These Pixies have subjugated the lycanthropes, but the Lycans want Vox Machina to enter the Pixie village and destroy a circle of crystal stones in the center of their home. Now Vox Machina asks a fair question. If you, bunch of frightening werewolves, weren't able to deal with the Pixies yourself, how do you expect us to handle them? And this isn't just a great question that has the potential to unravel a plot hole, but it could also completely shatter the threat posed to the heroes if Matt doesn't play his cards right. Because the way gamers and nerds in general tend to think about physical fights is extremely linear and binary. That is to say, in their minds, if someone can beat you in a fight, then anyone who could beat that person in a fight could obviously also beat you in a fight, and you'd have no way of beating them. You know, if the Hulk beats Spider-Man in a fight, and then Superman beats the Hulk in a fight, why would the Hulk ask Spider-Man to go fight Superman for him? That doesn't make any sense, because the Hulk is clearly stronger than Spidey, so what chance does Spider-Man have against someone stronger than the Hulk? And if you keep your eyes and ears peeled in nerd spaces, you'll be surprised how often this mentality pops up. But in D&D, this mentality is almost tacitly encouraged by the game itself, because characters do level up, and there are distinct power levels, and monsters have a challenge rating that tells you, in theory if not in practice, that certain monsters are more appropriate for different characters to face. So I can absolutely understand why Vox Machina believes in the transitive property of being a badass. So depending on how the lycanthropes answer, it's going to drastically change how the heroes respond. If the werewolves say, "Trust us, you can beat the pixies," then the players will start to think the lycans are just pushovers, and they don't need to worry about them. Why would they need to do what they say if they're not powerful enough to beat the pixies that the werewolves say they can beat? But if Ukurat says, "The pixies are even more powerful than us," then the players will think the pixies are too difficult to beat, and the players might start to despair that they're facing two factions that seem more powerful than them. But either way, this would kind of be a huge plot issue. Either the werewolves don't pose enough of a challenge to threaten the heroes, so why do what they said, or the pixies are too powerful for this proposal to make any sense. But Matt finds the perfect response. Ukurat says that the fact that Vox Machina overcame the campsite means they have skills the lycans don't. If Vox Machina doesn't want to take their chances against the pixies, that's fine. The werewolves can just hunt them. This is a great response because it doesn't neuter the threat of the werewolves, but it also doesn't make this proposal obviously foolish. The werewolves don't have the same abilities as the party, so they might have vulnerabilities the heroes might not have. Now, theoretically, it seems like the party has a chance to deal with these pixies. Keith asks if the lycans hunt the pixies. Like, what's the full story here? Do they just fight each other equally? Is Vox Machina getting involved in a turf war? Basically, she's asking if the lycans are genuinely the victims in this arrangement, or if Vox Machina might be signing up to help the bad guys. And Ukurat just says, well, then go talk to the pixies yourself. We'll watch you from a distance and see what you do. Basically, he's giving them permission to get the pixie side of the story, but if they try to run or not do what they said, the werewolves will intervene. And this is funny because I know that if I was running a group of lycanthropes and I wanted them to seem scary to the players, I'd probably not have them give up that much ground and allow the heroes to go talk to their enemies. But I don't think Matt considers the lycanthropes to be evil. When they say, fine, go get the other side of the story, this sends a signal to the players that the lycans probably are not the bad guys. I mean, maybe they are, but certainly they don't think of themselves that way, and maybe neither does Matt. Also, I think Matt just wants to put the players in front of the pixies, and then he'll be happy with whatever the players choose to do. I don't know that for sure, but that's how I tend to run my games. I don't necessarily have a preference for what the heroes do, but I want them to do things. So I need to put things in front of them so they're forced to make choices. Whether Vox Machina chooses to fight the pixies or talk to them, either way they're going to go to the pixies, which means they took the bait he put in front of them, and they're going to follow that thread. And honestly, this is what Matt needed. A mission his players could take on. Because this is going to drive the rest of the session, and it's built entirely around the dilemma the party is in. It's not something they just wandered into. I mean, technically, it kind of is, but not in at all the same way. The party doesn't feel like they got themselves into this problem by doing something they shouldn't have done. They feel like they were ambushed by the characters and not by Matt. It's a much better feeling dynamic than everything else they've really encountered in the Feywild so far. Now, as players are torn, they did still run this scenario through the transitive property of badassery, and they're really worried about trying to face these pixies. But also, as players, they're really excited to see the pixies. So they go find the fairy village, which is small and adorable, and as promised, there's a circle of crystals in the center. There are also 3 wolfmen who have been turned to stone, and they have vines and flowers draped across them. The party debates how to break the stones while also not getting too close, and ideally, without angering these pixies they're scared to fight. And so they decide that maybe they can trick the lycans into thinking they destroy the crystals and do so without hurting the pixies. Keith casts hallucinatory terrain and makes the fairy village look like it's on fire and everything's been smashed. Then the party just starts running. They figure they can just get out of the forest while everyone else is distracted. And just as they're about to reach the edge of the forest, they slam into an invisible barrier. There's a huge enchantment in place over the forest, and they cannot leave. At that moment, the lycans drop down right behind Vox Machina, and Ukurat is with them. And this is when we find out that if Vox Machina had actually succeeded, they could have left the forest. But because they failed, they're trapped in this forest with the lycans. And this is not because the party made a deal with the lycans. It's not like the situation with Garmelie, where Garmelie and Vax and Vex could not betray each other. This is because the pixies control the forest. At this point, the lycans just give up on Vox Machina and walk away. They call Vox Machina liars and deceivers and say, your meat would taste like ash. Because Matt doesn't need to set the hounds on them to make the party make a choice. They're now in a situation where they have to either talk to or fight the pixies. They can't just do the bare minimum and run. That's something that a lot of D&D groups will try to do. Players want to play smart, but as we've talked about a lot recently, they'll sometimes play so smart that they don't have to do any adventures. And sometimes it can be fun to allow your players to pull a fast one and outfox you. But if that becomes the norm, then they're not going to have as much fun as they could because they won't get to do most of the badass stuff if they never get into combat. And the Feywild arc presents a series of methods that Matt uses to push his players into making choices and not over-strategizing to the point where the game wouldn't be fun anymore. That's what the wall does, for sure. It traps them within the forest, so they can't just punt the question of which faction they have to work with. They have to choose. Grog swings his axe at the invisible wall, and he takes a bunch of damage and gets thrown back through the air. And Percy tries casting an illusion spell on the other side of the wall, but the magic will not penetrate it. That's enough testing to know they can't just wriggle their way out of this moral dilemma. And if you're running any scenario where the players have to choose which faction to ally with, you do need to be prepared for the possibility that the players will just try to say, no, none of the above, and leave if they can. And whether or not that's possible depends on what you want to do with the adventure. In this case, I suspect if the party had tried to run before confronting the pixies, the Lycans would have stopped them, since they were watching Vox Machina to make sure they didn't do exactly that. As the Lycans leave, the heroes call after them, hey, why didn't you just say, you can't leave the forest anyway, so go deal with the pixies if you want to get out? But Garmelie says, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. People come and go from this forest all the time. And this is not definitively cleared up in the episode, but it seems to me that the pixies have magically trapped the Lycans, but anyone else can come and go. But when it looked like the bomb had gone off in their village, the pixies probably locked down the entire forest so they could figure out what was going on. So because it's been more than an hour of game time, Vox Machina decides to take a long rest. I'm kidding. Not really. Like I said, we'll talk about the party's very strange relationship with time another day. But right now they just plan to rest and then deal with the pixies in the AM. As they begin their long rest, Keyleth turns into a saber-toothed tiger and patrols the forest. And sure enough, she sees two pixies flying around, a tiny search party, in every sense of the word, trying to figure out who cast a spell in their home. They see Keyleth and get suspicious, and Keyleth just pretends to be a dumb cat. As the pixies fly, Keyleth follows and listens for a while, but eventually the pixies realize they're being followed and they try to cast a few spells on her. Thankfully, she's able to resist the spells and she keeps pretending to be a dumb cat. But this is enough to worry the pixies, and so they go back to report to their group. Keyleth returns to the party just as Scanlan finishes reading his Tome of Leadership and Influence, and she tells the group what she saw. Matt said that a couple of hours had passed as Keyleth had followed the pixies, but I really like that Matt chose to just wrap up Scanlan's reading project right as she returned, because it keeps the game from feeling too asynchronous. They don't have to have a conversation about the book he read and also keep reminding themselves that Keyleth isn't there yet. They can just jump right to the point of the night where both things happen at once. Well done. As the rest of the party members settle in for their long rest, some pixies fly over and spot them and then immediately fly away and leave. The party wakes up and discusses this, but they don't really know what to do, so most of them just go right back to sleep.
At least we can prepare ourselves.
How?
Sleeping.
Just keep sleeping.
I wake Percival up.
No.
Percy.
What? Yes.
Hi, Grumpy.
What?
We've been discovered by fairies.
Oh, that's nice.
Get ready to use your charming wiles.
All right.
I'm gonna let Scanlan sleep a little bit more because he looks fucking exhausted. Can we, make things look fancy around here so when they all come back, we look like we're ready to talk to them?
I slowly crawl out. I pull out a piece of parchment.
Really pretty?
Sure. I mean, I'm asleep right now, but when I wake up...
Oh.
And I write, "Hello, fairies. We're napping." And I put it on the tree above us. Go back to sleep.
You're just letting Whitey go back to
Do
sleep
not
then?
disturb.
Fuck it. I go back to bed. I spoon Keyleth and fall asleep.
All right.
Oh,
Oh.
I'm intruding.
I'll allow it.
I actually go back to sleep, too.
Get back to
What
sleep.
in the
Back to
fuck
sleep.
is going on here?
Please.
How is this happening?
Vex. You don't want to wake.
Now, I didn't just play that clip because it's funny, although it is, but it also serves as an example of just how unprepared the party feels to fight the fairies. Even when Vex says, "Let's prepare," Grog asks, "How?" And they don't really have an answer. All they can really do is take a long rest so they have all their resources back. This is the same party that asked 4 or 5 different people what they should expect to face in the Feywild, because they still have not felt prepared for the Shademark Bog. So now that they've had basically no notice before dealing with these pixies, they really do not know what to do, and they've almost got analysis paralysis. So they take their long rest, and Matt allows them to finish their long rest. I don't know if the math really maths, but I think he saw how unprepared his players felt, and he decided that the least he could do was give his players the long rest they so desperately wanted. As they finish their long rest, many pixies approach. They're all tiny and glow with blue light, but the leader is purple. Vox Machina apologizes for scaring them with the illusory bomb, and explains that they were basically forced to help the Lycans. At the mention of the Fendir, the pixies start checking our heroes for bite marks. And Grog has some suspicious wounds since he hit the wall and also got his eyebrow cut. The pixies will only feel at ease if they can cast a spell on Grog to neutralize the danger. And while the others say, "No, let's try to stop that from happening," Grog says, no, it's fine, we'll be diplomatic, so go ahead and do what you need to do. And then the pixies turn him to stone. And Travis holds that pose for a while. Vox Machina tries to explain their plan to fool the Lycans without hurting the pixies. And the pixies say, "Okay, you've learned your lesson and you've been punished, so you can leave the forest." But turning Grog to stone was the punishment. The pixies start levitating the Grog statue and taking him with them because, he's gonna decorate their garden, I guess. But Keyleth casts Earthbind and he slams back down to the ground. The pixies warn the heroes to let them take grog, but Percy casts Hex on the lead pixie, and it's on. Oh, by the way, it was almost 8 minutes. That's how long Travis held that pose. As a signal that shit is about to go off, Matt describes a bunch of the fairy lights getting pulled into the Pixie Queen, and she glows brighter. But there are still some other pixies on the field as well. And it's initiative, so here are the highlights. First of all, the cast has rolled a lot of 1s and 20s today, but during this fight, they roll a lot of natural 20s. But the fight still winds up being really challenging for one reason. Counterspell. Now, this is not the first time the party's had to deal with Counterspell during a fight. Professor Anders and Whitestone had Counterspell, and I think some individual foes have had the spell in some other fights. But I believe this is the first time where multiple foes have had Counterspell. And in fact, all of the pixies have Counterspell, I believe. Which means Matt has to keep track of which pixies have used their reactions throughout the fight, and which ones have used them specifically to cast Counterspell. The most interesting moments of the fight are, frankly, dominated by this spell. Scanlan counterspells one of the pixies, but then one of the pixies counterspells Scanlan's wand of fireballs. Then the pixies polymorph him into a badger, presumably targeting him because they know he can cast Counterspell. They try to polymorph Vax, but Vax makes his save. Keyleth tries to cast Sunbeam, but it gets counterspelled. Percy kills the pixie who turned Scanlan into a badger, bringing him back to normal. Vex kills the lead pixie, the Mystic. Once again, Scanlan tries to use his wand of fireballs, but he gets counterspelled. Two pixies try to turn Keyleth to stone, but she resists the spell. Vax is not so lucky, he gets petrified and eventually turned to stone. Keyleth tries to cast Greater Restoration and unpetrify Grog, since poor Travis is not going to do anything during this entire encounter, but one of the pixies counterspells it. At this point, Matt does tell the players that the pixies are out of counterspells. If we look at the pixies in the monster manual, they don't have counterspell, or a spell to petrify people. They also only have 1 hit point, so we're definitely not using those stats. But they have other spells we've seen in this episode, like Polymorph and Sleep, which they try to cast on Keyleth, the cat. And each of those spells can be cast only once, so presumably these pixies can each only cast counterspell 1 time. Matt actually seems a little surprised at how tough this fight turned out, but they've been homebrewed by Matt, so they have different spells, a higher AC, and a lot more hit points. Most of them have something like 40 hit points, and Iotha has at least 100, according to crit roll stats. But their spells are where things get really nasty, because between Polymorph, Petrification, and of course Counterspell, their abilities are focused on costing the players their turns. You can't do anything with your turn if you've been Polymorphed or Petrified, and nothing happens on your turn if you get Counterspelled. Now, in past installments of this series, I've criticized game mechanics that don't allow players to do anything on their turns, like Possession. And Polymorph and Petrification definitely fall into that category. Poor Travis hasn't been able to do anything this entire fight, which means he's missing their first fight in 3 episodes. The last time Grog swung a weapon at anybody was during the Rakshasa encounter. Polymorph is not quite as bad, because it doesn't affect anybody's turns in this fight. Scanlan is restored before his turn comes back around, and Vax was going to be turned into a cat, but he made his save, but Liam was actually excited about being a kitty cat, so that spell would not have felt as bad for him as a player. But this is the first fight where Counterspell is a big deal. And I've talked about Counterspell recently and how some groups ban it because it's just not fun for players. I don't feel the need to go that far, but I do get it. In this fight, Marisha is frustrated by the fact that the pixies keep counterspelling her, especially as she's trying to use her higher level spells, and trying to get her friends back into the fight. But I also think that has a lot more to do with the fact that all of the enemies have access to Counterspell. Because any pixie can counter any spell, Keyleth and Scanlan don't manage to get any spells off during this fight up to this point. So this is kind of an interesting milestone for the party, because it absolutely teaches the players that Counterspell is going to be a thing in future fights, and they should be prepared for the bad guys to counterspell them. And not just their damage spells like Sunbeam and Fireball, but spells that would help their allies, like Greater Restoration to get Grog into the fight. And while that might be frustrating for his players to lose their actions, it doesn't cross over to the point of fully ruining the fun to have their spells countered. After all, the bad guys want to win, so of course they're going to fight dirty. However, I can't think of any other fight, with maybe one exception very late in Campaign 2, where every enemy in the fight had access to Counterspell. When I talked about Counterspell in that other video, I mentioned that if it's not fun for your players to get Counterspelled, you can just not give every spellcaster Counterspell. Save it for the important enemies, that sort of thing. As this fight demonstrates, there's another good reason to take that path. It helps the spellcasters feel more diverse, rather than all of them seeming to have the same skill set. And a bunch of people commented something to the effect of, why wouldn't you give every enemy spellcaster access to Counterspell when logically it makes the most sense for all of them to take Counterspell since it's such a good spell? And first of all, it speaks to a mentality about enemy NPCs that I don't agree with, which is that they all have access to the same abilities and spells as the players, and we'll talk about that another day, when I discuss why I do not like giving class levels to enemy NPCs. But even setting that aside, if you're looking for a justification for why an NPC wizard wouldn't take Counterspell, I don't know, dog, you're the game master. You can absolutely find a way to justify it. Because the point wasn't about world building, although, once again, stay tuned for a video about that at some point. But my argument was, if this game mechanic isn't fun for your group, don't use it. In this case, Matt didn't stop using Counterspell altogether after this fight, but he did realize it wasn't fun to dogpile his players with Counterspell, regardless of whether or not it makes sense for all the pixies to have the same spells. Let me hit you with an analogy. A few years ago, I got together with some friends to play some board games, and I got there a little late, so they'd started without me. They'd already played a few rounds of Spyfall, and they were excited for me to play too. If you're not familiar, Spyfall is a card game where everyone at the table gets a card. For most players, their card has a picture of a location, like the beach or amusement park. But one player just gets a card that identifies them as the spy. And then everyone at the table asks questions to see if other players know where they are. And if you can't answer in a way that's satisfying, you're probably the spy. And the first time I played, I got the spy card, and I hadn't played before, so it was super easy to catch me in a lie, since I didn't really know how the game worked. We played another round, and I was the spy again. Then we played another round, and once again, I was the spy. And on the fourth round, when they turned to me to ask me the first question to see if I could identify where we all were, is there anyone here that you would recognize, something like that, I just sighed and said, I wonder what it's like to actually play this game. I bet it's fun. That's what I think of when I watch this fight. The issue is not that the group doesn't like getting counterspelled. In general, sure, it might be frustrating, but it functions as part of the push and pull of the game, and it suits how Matt runs his games, especially post-Killbox, where tactics and strategy are really important. The game mechanic is not the issue. But just because they don't mind the mechanic doesn't mean that it's fun to get hit with it over and over, to the point where they really don't get to participate in the combat. I think the intensity of this fight also caught Matt off guard. He refers to these pixies as being weak, but they just have a few powerful abilities. But I don't think he realized just how overwhelming those abilities would feel. The players have rolled a bunch of nat 20s, and they're still really intimidated. They think this is a really hard fight. And of course, it is, because half the party is barely getting to do anything. And by the way, none of this is meant to be a critique of Matt. The reason this fight was more powerful than he expected is because this is still a relatively new system to him, and these are homebrew monsters. As time goes on, he's going to get more familiar with the system and have a better sense of how powerful his homebrew is before he deploys it, although you can never really know for sure until you're actually putting it in your game. But that's just part of the GMing process. You learn that maybe the pixies should have had a couple of damage spells instead of focusing on abilities that really just prevent the players from playing. Okay, getting back to the fight. After Keyleth gets counterspelled, she shifts her vocal cords into those of a wolf and lets out a howl to try to call the Lycans into the fight. Now that the pixies can no longer counterspell, Scanlan summons Bigby's hand and bashes a pixie to death. That leaves only one alive, and the party discusses sparing it, so they can potentially restore their friends who have been turned to stone. However, as that pixie starts to run away, Ukurat drops down in front of it, catches it, and eats it. He rallies the rest of the Lycans, and they go to slaughter the remaining pixies. Keyleth burns her last 2 high-level spell slots to restore Grog and Vax to life. They follow the Lycans and watch them destroy the pixie village. Vox Machina feels bad about this, but they take some comfort in the fact that they tried to find a peaceful way out of this. Ukurat destroys the crystals and tells Vox Machina that they can now leave the forest. He sends the other Lycans away to go find a new home for them elsewhere in the Feywild. He will follow Vox Machina, so when they need him for the final fight, they can call on him and he will help. He won't travel with them, and this is a really smart arrangement. As someone who has run games where the players just keep picking up NPC allies who accompany the party everywhere they go, and you sort of just forget everyone who's supposed to be in their little entourage, I should absolutely start doing what Matt does here, where an NPC just says, I'll come with you for one mission, or you can call on me for one fight and I'll be there. It would work so much better than what I do. It saves so much work and difficulty in the 5e games that I run. Vox Machina loots the pixie village, and they don't find a ton, but they do discover a small onyx statue of a dog. That'll be relevant a little bit later in the game.
I'm a bit tapped on my higher level energy, but can I maybe take a minute to kind of ritual cast Greater Restoration on the 2 new statues of the lycanthropes?
Is it a ritual? I don't believe it can be cast as a ritual.
Greater Restoration? You can't like take my time with it?
You have to stay here the night and do it again.
We'll come back this
They'll
way.
figure it out.
The gray ground
It's a good bargaining chip for later.
Just where the circle was.
Thought about
not
it.
everything.
Yeah.
No, just the circle.
Let's just find out who
I know,
they
yeah,
are.
that makes
Start doing really nice things.
Things
We
for
just
them.
killed Fern Gully.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
tenuous at the moment.
We did kill Fern Gully.
If
We
they
totally
had,
killed Fern
yeah, but
Gully.
if they had any good in their heart, why would they be trapping travelers of any kind?
They're tiny.
They weren't trapping travelers of any
Who were?
kind, they were trapping the Lycans.
And then they
Us?
trapped us.
Yeah, but then they let us out.
They didn't really let us
Let
out.
us out.
Everyone was bad, including us, and we lived.
Yeah, welcome to the
That's it.
departed.
They leave the forest, and they can hear the rushing rivers of the Gilded Run. And Carmelia references that the rivers are dangerous, and the players just don't want to mess with it right now. The Lycans gave them safe passage out of the forest, so they might as well just take a long rest in the forest since they're still safe there. So since Scanlan used his high-level spell slot to cast Bigby's hand, they can't use the mansion, so they climb up into the trees and they take a long rest among the branches. And that brings us to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks when we discuss episode 62, Uninviting Waters, This is another live show, this one from Gen Con in Indianapolis, so make sure to subscribe to catch that video when it comes out. It's going to be a really interesting video to talk about. And catch some other videos in between now and then. We're going to do some fun ones. Make sure to like this video, leave a comment, ring the bell, support me on Patreon, join my Discord server, and sign up for my mailing list. Make sure you're registered to vote. It's very important, especially this year. Click here to watch my latest video. It's a thought experiment where I adapt one of Critical Role's Campaign 2 characters into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Until next time, play fair and have fun.